I am sitting in my apartment right now, staring at a text message from my father. It says he needs to talk urgently about something important. 12 years ago, this same man looked me in the eyes and told me that boys need to learn independence, that he would not pay for my college education. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school while watching my sister receive everything I was denied. So why is he reaching out now after years of silence? Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you have ever felt like you were treated unfairly within your own family, please stay with me until the end. I think you will find something meaningful here. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already, because this journey taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. Our house sat on a street lined with maple trees, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other and summer evenings meant the sound of kids playing until the streetlights came on. From the outside, we looked like any other middle-class American family. My father, Gerald, worked as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant. He was a traditional man who believed in hard work, discipline, and the idea that men should earn their place in the world. My mother, Susan, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. She had a gentle soul, always quick with a warm smile, though she rarely contradicted my father on anything important. Then there was my sister, Clarissa. She came along 3 years after me, and from the moment she arrived, something shifted in our household. I remember being 7 years old and excited to have a sibling, not understanding yet how different our paths would become. Clarissa had our mother's soft features and our father's stubborn streak, a combination that somehow made her the center of attention in ways I never quite managed to be. Growing up, I was what most people would call a good kid. I earned decent grades, helped around the house without being asked, and stayed out of trouble. By the time I turned 12, I had a list of chores that felt endless. Every Saturday morning meant mowing the lawn in summer or shoveling snow in winter. I cleaned out the garage twice a year, helped my father with car maintenance, and took out the trash without fail. These responsibilities were presented to me as character building, as preparation for manhood. Clarissa's responsibilities looked different. She was expected to keep her room tidy and occasionally help our mother with dinner. When I asked why she did not have to help with yard work, my father would say that girls needed to be protected, that the world was harder on them in different ways. I accepted this explanation because I trusted my parents. I told myself that this was simply how families worked, that sons and daughters had different roles to play. Despite the extra work, I never felt unloved. My parents attended my basketball games. My mother baked my favorite chocolate cake every birthday. My father taught me to drive and seemed proud when I passed my test on the first attempt. When I started thinking about college, I felt certain that my family would support me the way families were supposed to. I dreamed of studying business, maybe starting my own company someday. My father once told me that with grades like mine, my future was wide open. I held on to those words like a promise. The spring of my senior year arrived with cherry blossoms and acceptance letters. I will never forget the afternoon I pulled that envelope from Ohio State University out of the mailbox. My hands trembled as I tore it open and read the word that changed everything. Congratulations. I sprinted inside to share the news with my parents, my heart pounding with excitement and pride. That evening, we sat down for dinner as a family. My mother had made pot roast, and the house smelled like comfort and celebration. I could barely contain myself as I described the campus, the business program, the opportunities waiting for me. Then I mentioned tuition. I asked about the plan for paying for my education, assuming we would discuss financial aid savings accounts, perhaps a payment schedule. My father set down his fork and knife. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, slowly, deliberately. Then he looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. He said that he and my mother had been discussing this for some time. He said that I was 18 now, legally an adult, and it was time for me to learn how to take care of myself. He said that real men built their own lives from the ground up, that independence was the most valuable gift a parent could give a son. I felt the words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my mother, searching for some sign that this was a joke or a test. She would not meet my eyes. She stared at her plate, pushing food around with her fork. Clarissa sat beside her, silent, her face revealing nothing. I asked if he was serious. I asked what I was supposed to do, how I was supposed to afford tuition and books and housing on my own at 18 with no job experience and no savings. My father repeated that this was an important lesson. He said he had worked his way through his own education and that struggle had made him who he was. He said he expected the same resilience from his son. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. The acceptance letter that had filled me with hope that morning now felt like a cruel joke. I had been pushed out of the nest without warning, and the ground below looked impossibly far away. 3 years passed. 3 years of working 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. 3 years of exhaustion, ramen noodles, and constant financial anxiety. I had found a rhythm, however brutal. I waited tables at a restaurant 4 nights a week and delivered packages on weekends. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. My grades suffered in the beginning, but I refused to let them slip too far. I was determined to prove something, though I was not entirely sure what or to whom. One evening, during my junior year, I called home to check in with my mother. These calls had become less frequent over time, but I tried to maintain some connection. As the phone rang, I heard her answer, not realizing I was on the line. She was talking to Clarissa, who was preparing to start college that fall. I heard my mother say that Clarissa should not worry about anything, that they had prepared her tuition in full. Clarissa responded that she wanted to attend a private university, that the tuition was significantly higher than state school rates. My mother's voice was reassuring. She said she would speak with my father, that they would make it work for their daughter. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in my cramped apartment, the phone pressed against my ear, listening to a conversation that shattered something inside me. When my mother finally realized I was on the line, she fumbled for words. I asked her directly what was happening. I asked why Clarissa was receiving full financial support when I had been told independence was my lesson to learn. My mother's response cut deeper than any outright cruelty could have. She said circumstances were different, that daughters needed more protection and support than sons. She said the world was harder for women, that Clarissa could not be expected to struggle the way I had. I hung up and immediately called my father. His explanation mirrored my mother's almost word for word. He said that girls could not fend for themselves the way boys could. He said supporting Clarissa was their responsibility as parents. When I pointed out that I was also their child, that I had also needed support, he simply repeated that I had learned valuable lessons from my struggle. Clarissa enrolled at a private university with tuition 3 times higher than what I had paid at state school. She received a car as a graduation gift. She lived in a nice apartment that my parents helped furnish. And I continued to scrape by, working double shifts and counting every penny, while the weight of unfairness settled permanently into my chest. My college years became a masterclass in survival. I learned to function on 4 or 5 hours of sleep because I had no choice. After classes ended each day, I would rush to the restaurant where I waited tables until close. Weekends meant delivering packages across the city, loading my aging car with boxes and driving until my back ached and my eyes burned. Food became a math problem rather than a pleasure. I calculated exactly how many meals I could stretch from a package of instant noodles, how long a loaf of cheap bread would last, which day of the week the grocery store marked down items approaching their expiration dates. There were months when I ate the same thing for dinner every single night because it was all I could afford. My living situation offered no comfort either. I shared a small apartment with 3 other students, all of us desperate to minimize expenses. The walls were thin enough to hear every conversation, every argument, every late-night phone call. Privacy did not exist. Rest was almost impossible. We rotated schedules to avoid stumbling over each other in the narrow hallway, but the tension of living in such close quarters never fully dissipated. One semester, I nearly had to drop out entirely. I had miscalculated my finances, and the tuition bill came due with nothing left in my account. I sat at the financial aid office for 3 hours, pleading my case, explaining my situation to anyone who would listen. A sympathetic administrator helped me find an emergency grant I had not known existed. That money kept me enrolled by a margin of less than $200. The winter of my sophomore year brought a crisis I still remember with painful clarity. My car, a 15-year-old sedan I had bought for $800, broke down completely. The repair estimate exceeded what I had saved over 3 months. Without transportation, I could not get to my delivery job. Without that income, I could not pay rent. The math was impossible, so I did the only thing I could. I walked 3 miles through snow and ice to reach my workplace because the alternative was losing everything I had built. That same winter, I got sick. Not just a cold, but a fever that kept me bedridden for nearly a week. I could not afford to miss work. I could not afford a doctor. So I dragged myself to my shifts serving customers while my head pounded and my body screamed for rest. The tips I earned those nights were barely worth the suffering, but suffering had become my normal state. During this time, I made one phone call I am not proud of. I was desperate, truly desperate, and I swallowed my pride enough to ask my father for help. I explained my situation. I told him I needed $500 to survive the next month, just enough to buy medicine and cover my portion of rent until I recovered. I promised to pay it back with interest. His response was calm, almost clinical. He said that adversity builds character. He said that I needed to learn how to weather storms on my own. He said that giving me money now would undermine all the growth I had achieved through my struggles. Then he wished me well and ended the call. That same month, I saw on social media that Clarissa had gone on a spring break trip to Cancun with her friends. The photos showed her lounging on beaches, drinking cocktails, smiling without a care in the world. Our parents had funded the entire vacation. The contrast was so stark, so absurd that I could not even feel angry anymore. I just felt hollow. My requests for help were not limited to money. When I lost my housing because a roommate stopped paying his share of rent, I called home again. I asked if I could stay in my old bedroom for just 1 month while I found a new place. My mother hesitated before telling me that my room no longer existed. She had converted it into a yoga studio shortly after I left for college. There was no space for me anymore. I slept in my car for 2 weeks. I parked in different locations each night to avoid attention, curling up in the back seat with a blanket I had found at a thrift store. I showered at the campus gym and changed clothes in bathroom stalls. Nobody knew. I was too ashamed to tell anyone, too afraid that admitting my circumstances would somehow make them more real. Thanksgiving of my junior year was when I finally understood my place in the family. Clarissa was hosting dinner at her apartment, the one our parents had helped furnish. I saw photos posted online of the gathering, the turkey, the decorations, the smiling faces of my parents and sister around a table set for celebration. I had not received an invitation. When I asked my mother about it later, she sounded surprised. She said she had assumed I would be working. The assumption spoke volumes about how they saw me as someone whose presence at family gatherings was optional at best. The distance between us grew wider with each passing month. My phone calls home became shorter and less frequent. I stopped sharing my struggles because I knew no support would come. I stopped asking about Clarissa's life because hearing about her comfort only deepened my pain. Slowly, I began building a life that did not include them at all. During this time, I found an unexpected mentor. Professor Harold Bennett taught one of my business courses, and he noticed something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. He saw potential. He saw resilience. He started inviting me to his office hours, not to discuss coursework, but to talk about life, about goals, about the future I could build despite everything working against me. His belief in me became a lifeline when my own faith in myself was running dry. My relationship with Clarissa during these years was almost non-existent. We exchanged brief messages on birthdays and holidays, nothing more. Once we ran into each other at a family gathering I had reluctantly attended. She looked me up and down and commented that I looked thin, asking if I did not know how to take care of myself. The irony of her words coming from someone who had never had to care for herself a day in her life was almost too much to bear. But I did not argue. I did not explain. By that point, I had stopped expecting understanding from anyone in my family. I was no longer angry in the burning, immediate way I had been at first. The anger had cooled into something harder and more permanent, a quiet resolve that would carry me through the years to come. I graduated with honors despite everything. That diploma represented more than academic achievement. It represented survival. It represented every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every moment I wanted to quit but refused to give up. Walking across that stage, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with my family watching from the audience because they were not there. They had not asked when the ceremony was, and I had not told them. My first job out of college was an entry-level position at a logistics company. The salary was modest, the work demanding, but I threw myself into it with everything I had. I arrived early and stayed late. I volunteered for projects nobody else wanted. I learned every aspect of the business not because I was told to, but because I understood that knowledge was the only currency I could count on. Within 2 years, I earned my first promotion. Within 5, I had moved into management. The same stubbornness that had kept me in school now drove me up the corporate ladder with relentless momentum. I saved aggressively, invested wisely, and built a financial foundation that would never crumble the way my family's support had. 8 years after graduating, I found myself sitting in a corner office as regional manager for one of the largest logistics companies in the Midwest. The view from that office showed a city I had conquered through sheer determination. Below me, the streets I had once walked in worn-out shoes now looked small and manageable. I had a good salary, a generous bonus structure, and stock options that grew more valuable each year. It was not extravagant, but it was comfortable. 2 bedrooms, one of which I converted into a home office. A kitchen with granite countertops and appliances that actually worked. A living room where I could sit in silence without hearing neighbors through paper-thin walls. These details might seem trivial, but to someone who had lived in his car, they meant everything. Beyond material success, I had built a life rich with genuine relationships. The friends who had stood by me during my hardest years remained close. We gathered regularly for dinners and game nights, celebrating each other's victories and supporting each other through setbacks. These bonds forged in struggle felt stronger than any family obligation could. I also met Grace. She was a marketing director at a client company, and our first conversation lasted 3 hours without either of us noticing the time passing. She knew my story, all of it, and she loved me not despite my past but because of who it had made me. For the first time in my life, I understood what unconditional support felt like. My contact with my family during this period was minimal. I knew through occasional social media updates that Clarissa had gotten married in an elaborate ceremony our parents had funded. I knew she and her husband had bought a house with help from our parents for the down payment. I knew our mother had retired from teaching while our father continued working. Beyond these surface details, their lives had become as distant to me as strangers in a news story. Then came the text message. After nearly 5 years of virtual silence, my father's name appeared on my phone screen with those words that brought me back to the beginning of this story. He needed to talk. It was urgent. Something important had happened. I almost deleted it without responding. Almost. But curiosity won out over caution, and I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop halfway between our locations. Neutral territory for a conversation I could not predict. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone gray, his shoulders seemed to sag under invisible weight, and his eyes carried a weariness I had never seen before. We sat across from each other at a small table, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between us, as he began to explain why he had reached out. The company where he had worked for over 30 years had gone bankrupt. His pension, which he had counted on for retirement, was gone. The savings they had accumulated over decades had been depleted first by Clarissa's expensive wedding, then by helping her and her husband purchase their home. My parents had assumed their retirement would be secure, had assumed their investments would recover, had assumed wrong about everything. Clarissa, he explained, was in no position to help. Her husband had lost his job during a recent round of layoffs. They were struggling to make their own mortgage payments, let alone contribute to our parents' expenses. The daughter, who had received everything, was now unable to give anything back. And then came the reason for our meeting. My mother needed surgery. A procedure that insurance would only partially cover, leaving a gap of tens of thousands of dollars. Their rent was coming due, bills were piling up. They had nowhere else to turn. My father leaned forward and spoke words I never expected to hear from him. He admitted that he had been hard on me. He acknowledged that perhaps he had pushed me too harshly. He said I was the only one who could help the family now. I sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the irony of this reversal. The son who had been told to learn independence was now being asked to rescue those who had abandoned him. The child who had been denied $500 in an emergency was now being asked for $40,000. When I finally spoke, I did not raise my voice. I did not shout or accuse or demand. I simply told the truth. I reminded him of the winter I walked 3 miles through snow because I could not afford to fix my car. I described the weeks I spent sleeping in my back seat because I had nowhere else to go. I asked if he remembered the phone call when I begged for $500, and he told me that adversity builds character. My father's face changed as I spoke. Something cracked behind his eyes, though, whether it was shame or simply surprise at hearing his own words reflected back at him, I could not tell. He tried to explain that he had thought he was doing the right thing, that he had believed struggle would make me stronger. I asked why Clarissa had not needed that same strength. I asked why her character did not require building through adversity. I asked why the lessons he considered so essential for his son were completely unnecessary for his daughter. He had no answer. For the first time in my memory, my father sat speechless before me. I made my decision in that silence. I told him that I would help pay for my mother's surgery not because he had asked, but because she was my mother and I could not watch her suffer for his choices. However, I was clear that this was not forgiveness. This was not reconciliation. This was simply me doing what was right, despite what had been done to me. I also told him that someday I would want an apology. A real one. Not the kind of apology that comes when someone needs money, but the kind that comes from genuine understanding of the harm he had caused. When he truly grasped what his choices had cost me, then we could talk about rebuilding what had been broken. I stood up, left money on the table for the coffee neither of us had touched, and walked out. He remained seated, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. The months following that meeting were complicated. I transferred funds to cover my mother's surgery and a portion of their immediate expenses. I did not contact my father again. I needed time to process what had happened and what it meant for the future. Grace was my anchor during this period. She listened without judgment as I described the conversation, the memories it had stirred, the emotions I was still sorting through. She held my hand and reminded me that helping did not mean forgetting, that generosity did not require amnesia. I also started seeing a therapist for the first time in my life. I had always resisted the idea, viewing it as an admission of weakness. But Grace convinced me that understanding my past was the only way to prevent it from controlling my future. Those sessions helped me see patterns I had never recognized, helped me understand how deeply the rejection from my family had shaped my relationships and my sense of self. Healing was not linear. Some days I felt at peace with my choices. Other days anger surged up, unexpectedly triggered by a memory or a song or nothing at all. I learned to sit with these feelings instead of fighting them, to acknowledge their validity. Without letting them consume me. 6 months after my mother's surgery, she called me. Her voice was stronger than it had been in years, and she spent the first 10 minutes simply crying into the phone. When she finally found words, they were the words I had needed to hear for over a decade. She told me she was sorry. She admitted that she had failed me, that she had let my father's beliefs override her own instincts, that she should have fought harder for fairness. She did not make excuses. She simply acknowledged the truth. A week later, a letter arrived from my father. It was handwritten, 6 pages long, and it trembled in my hands as I read it. He wrote about his own childhood, about the harshness he had experienced from his own father, about how he had confused cruelty with preparation. He admitted that he had been wrong. He acknowledged that his treatment of me had been unfair, that his favoritism toward Clarissa had been indefensible, that he had let his outdated beliefs about gender blind him to his responsibilities as a parent. He asked for nothing except the chance to someday earn back my respect. Clarissa has still not reached out. Perhaps she does not know the full story. Perhaps she knows and does not care. I have accepted that her silence may be permanent, and I have made peace with that possibility. My relationship with my parents remains a work in progress. We talk more often now, though the conversations stay surface level. Trust once broken so thoroughly cannot be rebuilt overnight. But the walls I built are no longer quite so high. I have left a door open even if I am not yet ready to walk through it. What I have learned through all of this is that independence does not come from being abandoned. Real strength does not come from suffering alone. My father was wrong about the lessons he thought he was teaching. The only lesson I learned from his rejection was that I could not count on him. The resilience I built came from choosing every single day to keep going despite that knowledge. Family does not automatically deserve loyalty. Love must be earned through actions, not assumed through blood. I spent too many years believing that my worth depended on their approval, that their treatment of me reflected something broken inside me. The truth is simpler and sadder. They made choices. Those choices had consequences. And I survived those consequences through my own determination, not through any gift they gave me. Today I stand on solid ground that I built myself. The career I have was earned through my labor. The home I live in was purchased with money I saved. The relationships I cherish were cultivated with intention and care. Nothing I have came from inheritance or favoritism. Everything I have came from refusing to accept the limitations others tried to place on me. 12 years ago, I was pushed out of my family home with nothing but an acceptance letter and a shattered heart. Today I could buy that house 10 times over if I wanted to, but I do not want to. What I want is what I have finally found. Peace with my past, clarity about my present, and hope for whatever future I choose to build. If you are watching this, and you recognize your own story and mine, I want you to know something important. You deserve better than what you received. Your worth is not measured by how your family treats you. The people who should love you most sometimes fail you most completely. That failure is their story, not yours. I would love to hear from you now. Have you ever experienced this kind of unfairness within your own family? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone in their struggle. Thank you for spending this time with me. Whatever situation you find yourself in right now, I hope you find the strength to keep going and the wisdom to know your own value. Take care of yourself because you are worth caring for.